Hammer time.
I'm not one really for selfies. I know I'm ugly. and I just don't want to take pictures of me, you know. Apparently my wife thinks I'm not ugly, but that's her problem, right? I indoctrinated her into loving me. Anyway, so I was doing a scope today. Back to the topic at hand. I was doing a scope today, and someone came on there. I appreciate it, Janelle. Someone came on my scope and said, because I had mentioned that I'm a youth director. Yeah, thanks, Russ. I appreciate that, man. I appreciate that. Yeah, I think it was a good one. It was a good one. Yeah, well, that's true. Take Chris's comment up with him. That's not where I want to go tonight. Anyway. Oh man, Chris, you're gonna get me in trouble with my atheist friends on here. Anyway, and so I was talking about how I'm a youth director, right? So I teach students about the Bible. Android is the future. I have an Android. I like Android. And so, just telling them, I'm essentially a youth pastor without the title. That's pretty much what I do. And someone, an atheist, said, "Oh, so you're into indoctrinating youth, right?" And apparently that's what churches do. Well, this is kind of a response. I get this a lot, which is why I put it in the title. And so the atheist is saying, well, I indoctrinate people. Right? So because... Me too, Wooly. Me too. Yes, that's right, Adam. That's right. Yeah, no, yeah. So this is kind of the context and the background to where this all came from. So just to give you some of the context. And as people come in, the conversation will change a little bit, which is fine. That's how Periscope works, right? The longer you're on, people join in at different times. They miss part of it. So anyway. And so that's kind of the background, okay? Someone came on the scope, said, you're indoctrinating young people to believe in Christianity. What's up, Catherine? And obviously that's a bad thing, right? So it's kind of a way to shut down dialogue. It's like calling the person you're talking to a racist or a homophobe or a bigot, right? It's like that catchphrase that you get them with, right? And it's like to kind of shut the other person down. And the problem is, so often we use these words, and it's ad hominem, that's right. We use these words, and the definitions that we're using them with is the definitions can be whatever we make them, right? They can be whatever we make them out to be. So to say to someone, or a Christian, right, you must indoctrinate your kids. So, as my kids get older, I'm going to teach them about the Bible. I'm going to teach them about what God's Word says. Yeah, Wooly. Well, and so I would argue I don't indoctrinate, right? Because Merriam-Webster's definition of indoctrination is to teach someone to fully accept the ideas, opinions, and beliefs of a particular group. And so the and is important here, and to not consider other ideas, opinions, and beliefs, right? So it's sharing one side, and not the other, right? So if I never ever mentioned Islam, if I never mentioned atheism, if I never mentioned any other viewpoint on a subject or a topic, or and part of that is dealing with some of the big issues in the Bible, right? There are serious issues. Yes, we do. We do. And obviously, as you probably know, right? So if a student comes every Wednesday night, let's say they come on a Wednesday night, there's only 52 weeks in a year, right? Teaching time is roughly 20 minutes in our church. And so, and obviously we don't meet every week. Very short amount of time that students spend actually being taught, right? A lot of our time is in small groups. A lot of that time is having open dialogues and in exchange. The case of science. So the case of science, whatever that means, right? Whatever the case of, because science makes a case for itself, apparently. And so I often will allow them or encourage them to hear the other side. I don't even know who that is. I don't know who Anthony Bosco is. I don't know who that is. So I don't know who that is. What is up, sir? Yeah, exactly. Oh, street epistemology. Well, and exactly, right? So I think Jason's onto something here. My A friends will get it. Oh, your atheist friends will get it. Gotcha. Okay. Right. So there are places and times, and here's also in one way. I know for me personally. Now, are there churches out there that do this? Of course. There's atheists that do this, that will teach their children to not actually look at the other side, right? And not give them the other side, and not expose them to Bible-believing Christians or other people who may have dealt with questions that they've had or whatever, right? And so I think the important thing is not to throw around words and use them in such a loose manner as to shut down conversation, right? Because that's what saying, oh, you indoctrinate people does. As FCS. What do you think I should teach the class related to apologetics? Why don't you hit me up on Twitter? That might be a better way. Follow me on Twitter and hit me up on Twitter. There's a few things running through my head, but I would want to think about it and ask you some questions before I answer that question. So yeah, hit Twitter. I got you, Twitter. Yes, Twitter. My Twitter handle is the same as this. I used to believe that Christians... Yeah, I didn't catch all of that. But thankfully, I've scoped. I used to believe that Christians were indoctrinated, but after I accepted the faith, I found the truth. Yeah, it's... Well, that's great, Adam. That's great. I think that's a good thing, right? And I don't shy away from students who say, you know what, I'm kind of an atheist. We have students that come to church and they're atheists, right? I don't tell them, hey, you need to be quiet about that atheism thing. No, that's nonsense. But they want to be there, right? They want to be there. They enjoy the community. They enjoy the interaction that we have, and I think, and they enjoy that there's people that actually care about them. And I don't force them to convert, right? I don't tell them you have to be a Christian in order to be here. We've had Muslims who have visited us. We've had Jews who have come and hung out with us. I don't force Christianity on any of them, right? Or for them to believe or anything, to come and be part of youth group. Yeah. Now, if we're talking church membership, that's a little bit different. And I think all of us would be able to make categories for that, right? Exactly. The Holy Spirit does the converting. That's right. And as a Reformed Christian, I believe that, right? The Holy Spirit has to work. And if we gotcha. If we think that by our wise words we can convince someone, then that's foolish as a Christian. Which is why I preach the gospel on here, right? There's people that are going to be like, oh, here he goes again, right? Here he goes again with the gospel. But there's power in the gospel. That's what I believe. The gospel has saved me. And so that's what I share. And so here's the deal. For my atheist friends, call people out. So Reformed Christian is people who come from the Reformed tradition. John Calvin, John Knox, Zwingli, those people. So, Martin Luther started the Reformation. That's kind of where it came. Yeah, exactly, Russell. So, anyway, Calvinism's part of it. So Calvinism is like part of Reformed theology. Define it more. So it's a big swath umbrella of theology. Calvinism's part of that. The five solas are part of that, and that would kind of be the main thing, right? So they're usually they are confessional, meaning they hold to a confession. What makes it different? The original difference really was over the will of man and the gospel. Well, Wooly, I assert it as truth because it's true. So I wouldn't assert it or preach it if I didn't think it was true, right? You don't actually say things that you don't think are true. And so my evidence doesn't. I don't know what you mean with bad evidence. Part of Reformed theology, Adam? Is that what you're asking? I would say no. I knew what you were saying, at least. Presuppositionalism. It's prevalent in the Reformed camp. And here's the reason why. Because people who are Reformed understand the power of sin and original sin and the bondage of the will. And that was Martin Luther's huge work, the bondage of the will. And we understand that man cannot choose what is good or right. And so presuppositionalism, essentially, we preach the gospel and we challenge the underlying presuppositions of where people are coming from. It's not this evidentialist way, like how William Lane Craig would like to do it, as I'm going to give you these rungs of the ladder to try to get to a God. And so as Christians, we understand, look, salvation isn't going to come simply by the intellect. Yep, that is part of it. Yep, you're right. It is part of it. Everyone knows God. They suppress the truth and unrighteousness. So part of that, right, coming from the Calvinist, is that it's not simply an intellectual issue. Yeah, it's not simply an intellectual issue with people. It's deeper than that. It's more than that. And so that's kind of part of it. So presuppositionalism flows out of the Reformed tradition. However, it's not like part and parcel of it. If that makes sense. If I'm making sense, right? If I'm making sense. So there you go. I appreciate the questions though. So for my atheist friends, to get back onto the indoctrination thing, when you see atheists using language in such a sloppy manner as to say that Christians are indoctrinating, right? Because indoctrination is more than just teaching someone something, right? It's actually withholding something from someone. And hang on, I'm getting to the other part, Jason. See, the problem is you can't know that anything's real, Janelle. That's the problem. That's the problem. You can't know anything's real. That's the problem. And so when you see someone using sloppy language like that, you should call them out, right? Because it's not good to use ad hominem in that way. Just like if there's Christians, okay, who are doing the same thing to atheists, I call that out. And I don't go on to many atheist scopes anymore. I haven't had the time. Yeah, I would say no. Right, Adam? Right? And when Christians are acting out of line, my favorite thief of the cross. I don't think I know that, Maz. I don't think I was following you there. And when Christians are acting out of line and they're doing that, I call them out as well. And so I think if we're going to be able to have conversations with each other, even on a pretty bad platform for it, like Periscope, we have to be attempting to be fair and dealing with each other fairly, right? And instead of this, yeah, right. Yeah, that's exactly it, Jason. If you're not withholding something and it's a willing, right? So I think there's motivation, right? And everything has motivation behind it. And the motivation does matter, right? So like a trying to hide it. And intention. That's right. That's right, Jason. And ultimately, and here's the funny thing, okay? Here's the funny thing. And this is why I got kind of upset with that remark, especially talking to someone who is a youth director / youth pastor, right? And I work with young people. I want them to come to the knowledge of the truth of the gospel, right? And here's why I made that a point to call that person out and do a scope about it was because Christians who do that, especially in youth ministry, end up hurting the people that they're trying to minister to. The people that they're trying to indoctrinate, they actually hurt. Because these young people go off to college, they go off to school, they go off to the workforce, right? And they're encountering... No, yeah, Janelle, I'm not saying people aren't indoctrinated. Oh, got what you're saying. Okay, I follow you now, Maz. Okay, gotcha. I got you. I must not have read it right then, or something. Right? So Janelle, I'm not saying it doesn't happen. It does happen. But a Christian who might be well-intentioned in wanting that young person to be a Christian their whole life, that young person goes off to college and they hear a bunch of different arguments. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. The foundation for epistemology is found in God, because the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. That's right. And so they end up hurting that young person, and they shoot themselves in the foot from what they were trying to accomplish, because that young person has never heard about things like the longer ending of Mark, right? So if you know anything about textual criticism or Bart Ehrman, right? People are always talking about the longer ending of Mark, or they're talking about, did you know there's missing verses in the Bible? And they'll point to some of these verses that aren't, that in newer translations like the ESV, NIV, stuff like that, they're not there. They're not there. And not just apologetics. Not just apologetics, because it's more than just defending their faith. It's understanding why they believe, which is an important aspect, right? So the question of why would I defend is just as important as how to defend, So don't confuse those two things. Those two things are important. In a lot of ways, they go hand in hand. But oftentimes we want to give people tools to defend the faith, but we're not actually giving them, this is why you should believe, and you should be able to tell me why you do believe, right? And so those things have to go hand in hand. Remember that when you're teaching. Anyway, and so I forget. So anyway, so they end up shooting themselves in the foot because these students go off and they hear arguments that they've never heard before and that their youth pastor never talked about. And maybe because he was ignorant, maybe because he was trying to hold something back, maybe mom and dad didn't know about these things, or they didn't want to bring these things up. A lot of different motivations there, right? And I don't want to judge motivations of people. But they go off and they hear these things, they don't understand, they don't have an answer for them. And they don't know where to go to try to get the other side of it. And so it's important for us, right? It's important for us to use language wisely. And so I call my atheist friends to do that, and I call my Christian brothers and sisters to do that, to use language in a way that respects the person that you're talking to, but also that is upheld within your own worldview. And so the person who said that I'm indoctrinating simply because I teach the Bible, that means that anytime they tell someone that God doesn't exist, and they shouldn't believe in God, that they're indoctrinating someone, which is nonsense. That means everyone is indoctrinating everyone anytime you talk. Yeah, a lot of them. Yeah, the problem is, Wooly, though, that there are Christian understandings to what we see in nature, right? Sounds good. Sounds good. Slave of Christ. I don't know what to call you other than that, I guess. So, I missed your question, Adam. Let me go back. How can they say that if they haven't been to your class? How can they say what? Yeah, that's true. That's true, Antario. That's right. A lot of people are woefully uninformed, even in Christianity. Indoctrination. Yeah. Gotcha. When people say indoctrination, right? Yeah. No, there's Christian misconceptions about what we see in nature and how we know things. So Wooly, there are Christian ways to explain the data we get from carbon-14 dating. There are Christian viewpoints on that. Okay? I've said this multiple times. Multiple times. If God did create, He created a fully functioning world. He didn't create baby trees. He didn't create baby human beings. He created mature beings and mature trees and animals. Whatever you want to call it. Whatever you want to call it. Radiometric, all of that. There right? So if God created everything fully formed and in maturity, we would expect to see some of those things, right? We would expect to see some of those things. Which would fit within the Christian worldview. It doesn't go against the Christian worldview at all. And that's just the radiometric dating of the earth, whatever you want to go by there. And so so that's really what this scope is all about. It's not answering atheist objections or anything like that, but it's calling people to a higher standard of how we use words, and understanding what words exactly how we use words, a fully mature world. Yeah. How we use words, and how we treat other people, and And I think if we do that, thanks. I appreciate that, Adam. I appreciate that, man. Thanks for being on here. Thanks for asking good questions and being civil as you always are. Anyway, guys, thanks for being on here. It's getting late, even for a Friday, and I may only be 29, but with 2 kids, I feel much older, much older than that. Oh man, yeah, you're made of. Yeah, I know. Well, I'm working on it, Adam. I'm working on it. Oh, man. Anyway, I don't really have anything else to do. I kind of like seeing people go back and forth in the comments. I like seeing... There's people debating each other in the comments. Kind of like that. Where it's like not all on me, you know. But yeah, I know what happens, Jason. And I've always been. I'm a few days. Oh, thanks. I appreciate that. Adley, I think, is that your name, Adley? Thanks. I appreciate that. But I love people like fighting in the comments. And it's like, especially if I'm doing a Q&A. Well, it's nice to meet you. Thanks for being here. Yeah. Yeah, Jason. It's funny. I need to, what I should do is when I end scopes, because I think on Scoper Chat it like saves the comments until, and I don't know if it saves them for like a while or if they're just on there until you shut down the window or whatever. But I should go back and like read what people are writing to each other. Yeah. Wooly believes that we are stardust. That's what. Oh, okay, Steven. Okay. Yeah. It would be funny, Janelle, to go back and just see what people are saying to each other. I think would be, because I can't keep up with it. And I don't know if you've scoped, Janelle, but you've been on scopes and you see how fast those comments go by. It's really. We are stardust. So Janelle thinks we're stardust too. I've never heard of Stardust getting upset about of what Stardust does to other Stardust. Yeah, you're gonna call. There you go. You think you're Stardust too. I think you're more than Stardust. Actually, I know you're more than Stardust. You're more than cosmic broccoli, as Dan Barker put it. Can I be Gold Dust? The wrestler Gold Dust. Yeah, in a worldview that you believe you're stardust, I mean, you have no value or worth or dignity at all. Like, none. Zero. And you have no basis or grounding to get upset when someone kills another human being. You have no basis. They do. Have you used it before, Jason? If you're stardust, okay? Awesome, Russell. Awesome. I'll be off pretty soon. So, you just checked. Okay. Oh, you checked some of yours. Gotcha. Okay, cool. Yeah, I saw some of the replays that you had. They seem interesting. But you all don't want to learn about it. Yes, because there are Christians that have never, ever done science, ever. Like, no scientist in the history of mankind has ever been a Christian. It's weird. It's just really weird. It's weird, right? Yeah, and we talk like that too, Wooly, right? We talk like that too. Happy Sabbath. Are we in the Old Testament? Is it That's the Old Testament? Is that where we're at? Right? I celebrate the Lord's Day, bruh. There, Mr. King. I celebrate the Lord's Day. But that's me. I don't hold the Sabbath over people as if, anyway. From OT, but not creation. Something. So Jason, that would actually be recommended study Bible. I like the ESV study Bible. I know there's people who don't like study Bible. Is Stardust better than Angel Dust? Angel Dust gets you high, I think, right? Yeah. So, yep, I'll get to you, Jason. So, I like the ESV Study Bible. It's more than just one person. The MacArthur Study Bible's all right, too. It's okay, but it's by one person. It's just by John MacArthur. And, having more people in there is good. Yeah. Yeah, it's as if Christians don't like science, which is nonsense. Yeah, Angel Dust is made of stardust. Woolly's made of stardust. Thus, Woolly is practically a drug. Woolly is a drug. So, the Old Testament to New Testament. So, Jason asked about this. In the Old Testament, especially when it comes to law. So when I said the Sabbath, right? That's a law that was given. Creation isn't a law. That's just historical narrative, right? Like, this is how it went. Okay. Seventh-day Adventists, right there. Facepalm. Okay. Anyway, so when you're talking law, it depends, right? So it depends. There's law, right, that is moral, and the moral law applies to everyone, all times. Okay, you shall not murder. Okay, is an example of that. That applies across the board to everyone. You should not murder someone else. Okay, that applies to everyone. But then we have what's called civil law. And so civil law has kind of two aspects within civil law. You have the law that applies to the nation of Israel. An example of this would be that you have to put railings on the top of your roof. Now, the reason they did that, obviously, was for safety. It would get hot. They would use the tops of their roof as like living space. And so that people didn't fall off the side of their home. That's for language. So people didn't fall off. I'll get to that in a second, Catherine. So that people don't fall off their roof, right? That would be up there. Now, there's principles we can take from that, right? An example of a principle that we take and apply it to modern times is pools. A lot of places, I think every place in the United States, maybe not, I don't know. Every place I have lived, you have to have a fence around your pool. And not like just around the pool, but like around your yard. So people can't come in and just fall in or whatever. So we use examples, right? So the it can apply beyond that, but it's not moral law in the sense that it applies everywhere, all time, for everyone. So that's civic law, okay? And then we have ceremonial law. And this applies to the worship of Yahweh for the Jews. And so both civic law passed away with the dispersion. So civic law is done away with because Israel is no more. We have the nation of Israel. But when Israel was done, it was over. Okay? The civic law doesn't apply to us. We don't live in Israel. If we lived in Israel, we might have a different discussion. But and so the ceremonial law likewise doesn't apply to us because Jesus fulfills the ceremonial law. So like the moral law stands. That's right. That's right. Ceremonial law was like the cleanliness laws and stuff like that. It was how they were to approach Yahweh. Okay, and so when we talk about the distinctions, there is a lot of work that goes into it, and scholars do debate this. This isn't like something that, and a lot of Christians have never even heard of those distinctions before. Like I wasn't raised understanding those distinctions. I learned those simply by listening to people. And so it's not a common thing that people are taught about that, which is why, oh, cool, Jason. It like the breakdown of those things aren't something that is often discussed, but some of those things are heavily debated. And so there's some people who say, well, we know it's moral law because it's carried on into the New Testament. That's an argument that people make within Christendom, right? So if it's carried on through the New Testament, it can be applied. Now, the problem with that is there are some things in the Old Testament that most people would hold to be moral law and a moral standard that isn't talked about in the New Testament. Hillsong Church, any good? You're a little off topic, Mary. just a little bit. I'm not a fan. I'm not a fan of Hillsong Church. That's just me. But I don't know enough about them to criticize them. So I'm not going to do that. Anyway. You go to Calvary Chapel. The Sabbath wasn't abolished. The Sabbath wasn't abolished. We are still to have a day of rest. The specific day, like what day that is, there's freedom within that now. The early Christians celebrated the Lord's Day, which is Sunday, when Jesus rose from the dead. You can't deny that, right? You just can't. But anyway, I'm not going to the Seventh-day Adventist thing. It goes nowhere. Never does. And so I kind of forget what I was talking about before. That's typically what, Old Testament law. So there's discussions that we have to have talking about Old Testament law, and what category it would fall on, like under. And also there's a lot of misconceptions about Old Testament law, because Old Testament law is not just this verse and that's that. It's a code book, right? So it's a code. Are you a Seventh-day Adventist? Yes or no? Mr. King. Yes or no? That's all I want to know. Yes or no? Anyway, it's a code book, right? And just like in our law, they apply, right? So laws like kind of build on each other. Why is this exhausting, Catherine? Maybe you can tell me, why is this exhausting? Do I need to be more cheery or something? Or what? It seems too confusing and hard to understand. Okay, so Mr. King, you don't want to answer the question. Great. I'm assuming that means you are. So what doesn't make sense? Yeah. It did expand. Here's another thing, which will exhaust you more, Catherine, because it takes work to understand these things. That's what happens when you're studying an ancient text. It takes work. And there's scholars who spend their whole lives studying this stuff. Yeah, well, but that's the discussion, right? So the discussion ultimately is this moral law or not? And how are we going to substantiate either way? Right? And so there are debates that go on about these things. There's certain things that there aren't debates about. Homosexuality, that's not a debate, whether that's moral or not. The New Testament's clear on it. The Old Testament's clear on it. Now, I know a lot of people don't like that, right? Yeah. Yeah. Of course there is. Of course there is. To say, right, just because there's some difficult understandings or some difficult laws to understand doesn't mean there aren't clear ones that we can understand. Right? Like murder. That's a clear one to understand. The same would apply to science, to anything, to any subject. Take any subject. It applies to any subject, right? Just because there are some things that are difficult, or are some things that maybe are unclear, or have been misunderstood, doesn't mean... Yeah, you would have argued differently on many things. So arguing differently means that no one can have the right answer, or that is false, right? So here's what I mean, Catherine, right? Because people make different arguments about something doesn't mean that what they're arguing over is false, right? So that's a fallacy. That's a logical fallacy, right? People can make arguments for anything, right? No, Catherine, it's work. It's work. It's work to understand an ancient text. It's work. And this is what happens, right? When, and I'm not saying this is you, but this is what I've seen from a lot of people. Okay? Yeah. If it ain't green, it's a Jeep. If it ain't green, it ain't a Jeep. That's funny, right? Is we get this, like, people get this mushy-gushy evangelicalism. And it would be interesting to hear some of your backstory, like what kind of church you grew up in, because you said you used to be a Christian, you're doubting. I haven't caught one of your scopes recently. I think I was on one a while back. That's kind of how we met, or whatever. But we get this mushy-gushy Christianity that's supposed to make you feel good, right? Without understanding how much blood, sweat, tears, and work have gone into understanding the Bible, to preserving the Bible, to spreading the Word of God. And it's work, right? Exegesis takes work to do. People think, like, pastors who are true to the Word of God, who seek to communicate it properly, put in work. Put in work to do it. And we think like we should just get all the answers. And I'm not, and Catherine, I'm, sorry if you feel like you're getting picked on. I'm not picking on you, okay? Like, I'm not saying this is necessarily you, all right? But it's work, and it takes work to understand these things. And so the Old Testament law, the point I was getting at when Catherine interrupted me, or not interrupted me, sorry, it's late. I'm not using words wisely. And Catherine said that it was exhausting. So the Old Testament law is a code book. And I'll do a little bit more on some of this stuff probably. It's a code book. It's a law book. And precedents are set in the Old Testament. So like slavery is a great example. There's lots of verses on slavery. People like to point to the ones that sound the worst without understanding historical context. Without Jason, as in like, why don't Christians celebrate those? Is that what you're asking? Without understanding its historical context, and without understanding the other passages that would apply to that, right? It's because they aren't just within themselves. Like, they're not in a vacuum. They're not in a vacuum. They're not. So, you have to be going to the right church. There's plenty of churches that have theological differences that would still call each other brothers and sisters in Christ. So there you go. Yes, Mr. King is right about this. It's a precept upon precept, right? So it builds on top of each other. There he is, Mr. Wrong again. Blocked that dude. I forget what your name is. But blocked him, and I unblocked him. I made sure to I told everyone when I did it that I'll unblock him, and I did it, and he's back. So, welcome back. Anyway, so a lot of things go into that. I'll answer Jason's... Well, appreciate that, Jason. I'll answer Jason's question, because he said, what about Passover? And did you say Hanukkah? Was that the other one? Yeah, so... See, there you go. Look at that. You'll have to catch the replay. I think you'll actually probably agree with me at the beginning of my scope. Especially the MC Hammer dancing. You'll like that. Anyway, so Christians don't celebrate Passover because that would apply to the Jews. It was now there are Christians who do celebrate it, right? So and we do teach it because it's significant. It is significant for sure. But we don't celebrate Passover as the Jews were commanded to do that, because that's a ceremonial commandment, right? The fasting and the prayer and all of that stuff. So that's kind of a simple question. Or that's a simple answer to that question. There's people who could give you a really deep. Well, and so Jews who have been converted, that's a good question. Jews who have been converted now, and especially in the early church, the biggest fight was over food laws. And what are food laws, right? And the fact that there were Gentiles that were in the church and they were arguing over food laws. Because the Jews grew up thinking, well, pork's bad, and, shellfish is bad, we shouldn't be eating this. Well, the Gentiles had no problem consuming that food. Right? And so, and so that was kind of the first fight. And it came down to the fact that that's a ceremonial law. That's a ceremonial law. That's for the worship of the people. And in ways, it's also a civic law, because God establishes Israel to be a showcase people, to be different, right, than the people around them. And so some of these things actually overlap each other. They're not like set boundaries, which adds another little kind of twist to Old Testament law. But I'm trying to answer your questions as best I can. I'm not an expert by any means. I have a lot of learning to do in that area. There's some people that are much better than I, but I have no idea. It doesn't matter. And that's the thing about Christianity that separates it from like Islam. Islam, in order for it to flourish and have full effect, need a governmental system to flourish. Christianity does not. Christianity does not need that. It is not predicated on a government. It's predicated on heart change in the gospel. So, anyway, guys, I have to go to bed. Hopefully this has been a good conversation. If you came in late, check the first part. I actually kind of ramble before getting to my point, so you might have to like fast forward a little bit. Well, I'm glad, Jason, and I appreciate your questions, man. And just so you know, you can ask me questions on Twitter. My Twitter handle is the same as this. I scope fairly often. I try to anyway. If you have a question and you want to shoot it at me, feel free to do that. See you, Janelle. Thanks for being here. Feel free to hit me up on Twitter. That's how you can get a hold of me. Same as my Periscope handle. So, and if I can't give you the answer, I'll find a resource. I'll find I'll find something for you. So, anyway, guys, grace and peace. Have a good night and enjoy your weekend. Because you know what? You deserve a nice weekend. We'll talk to you guys later.